If you disabuse yourself of hate, then you would know that African sexuality has always been diverse. What the global village has done through the internet is simply to unveil this for us. You don't want to miss the interesting conversations on demystifying the African Sexuality podcast. The DAS Podcast.
Alright, welcome to part 2 of the DAS podcast, and this is episode 5, and we have Sean for this particular part. Now, Sean, let's get into it. Can you provide an overview of the current laws that criminalize sexual orientation in Uganda and Africa and their impact on LGBTQ persons?
Well, thank you and welcome back, our listeners. There are several African countries that criminalize homosexuality, and in Uganda we have laws that criminalize. In Uganda we had, under the Penal Code Act, Section 145, which criminalizes carnal against the order of nature, and of course the Constitution, which also prohibits same-sex marriages. Those were some of the laws that have been used in country to criminalize and persecute LGBT persons. And until recently, which is in March 2023, we saw the reintroduction actually of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, and this generally creates established new penalties and new offences, which basically cover what the Anti-Homosexuality Act in its state and nature right now covers or removes everything that was before, which is the the Penal Code Section 145. And of course we are seeing other African countries like Zambia, Kenya, Ghana trying to also to see how they copy, the law in Uganda. We've seen calls for this law to be an African law. So we have in-country laws that prohibit or criminalize the act, unfortunately, but not the existence, and that has been used to really curtail LGBT in the continent and specifically in Uganda. And also we have the impact of these laws really are depending on community to community. For example, in Uganda we have our organizing going back underground as organizations, as a movement that also brings, sort of takes 2 steps back of where work had reached, but also it increases. We've seen the increase of the vigilante groups that we've been talking about. We've seen increase of blackmail. We've seen state-sponsored persecution and profiling, where organizations and activists are being profiled. We've seen people, such laws also hinder access to services, so things like legal aid, things like health services. While generally they are saying that these laws, that the law in its nature does not, hinder people from accessing these things, we know how they work. As a trans person, you're not going to go to any health facility and seek medication as if it's normal. So we've seen its implications are being there to our communities, and unfortunately, with the lack of political protection and legal protection, there is not so much where some of us or some of the victims are able to to report some of these things. Yes.
All right. So in your opinion, what are some effective ways to combat the criminalization of sexuality in Uganda and Africa and promote tolerance and acceptance?
I think the first thing is what we are doing, trying to repeal the law. We have witnessed that there are 3 petitions that have been taken to court against the Anti-Homosexuality Act in its nature, and also that should also go along with strategic litigation. People who have been violated, can we stand up and speak and be counted? Can we create a profile of human rights violations that we can use and have them documented and say, what, these are our lives, these are our experiences, that we're calling for, government protection. and also looking at things like of course increasing awareness while we're being forced back to organize underground. I think this is also an opportunity as a movement and as a community to increase our visibility. One thing I keep on saying, that while the law is in existence and all these conversations around it have been around, I think they have done for us advocacy that we'll not be able to do in the next 5 years as organization and as a community. So if the fact that this is in the public discourse, the fact that right now everywhere the rainbow is known, for me, while it is a challenge, I also see that as an opportunity, because that visibility, that's where we build empathy, that's where we build that's how we can change people's mindsets. That's how we can create people to understand that we're also just as human as they are, and also to realize that queer people are almost in every family. So now people are like, who has had a rainbow? So anybody who has had a rainbow in every family, people are like, oh, you might be the person that we need to protect. So while there is this going on, our increasing this awareness and visibility is also one of the tools that we can use. And of course, increasing social security and protection, being each other's keeper. Like, we know all these things happening. People are being attacked, people are being evicted, people are being disowned. Can we have a social support system that is intentional? As community, can we create programs or services that are actually accessible to those that are actually in need of them? If we are talking about security services, can we have emergency support systems that are in place and functional? And also another thing can be around increasing our media engagement, things like this podcast. And if you've been following things that have been happening on spaces like Twitter, following and creating these media presences that increase engagement and public discourse around these matters. And of course, continuing our advocacy. Again, I will say this: advocacy is what has gotten us here, and is what is going to take us, to other greater steps. So also thinking about what have we been doing that needs to change, that has not worked. Rethinking about our strategies we've been using. What do we need to change? What do we need to adopt? What do we need to do better? And things like, holding space for us to call each other out in a safe way. Thinking about our own contribution to whatever it is that is going on would also be very helpful for us to,
Wonderful. So in your opinion, what role do cultural and traditional beliefs play in perpetuating discrimination against LGBTQ persons, and how can we address this issue?
Again, following up from the conversation of the anti-gender movement and anti-rights movements, we've seen that many cultures and within Uganda believe that being homosexual is a Western import, and that it's incompatible with African culture. So this can lead to the stigmatization of LGBT people, in a sense that it creates an environment where discrimination and violence against us is acceptable, because if someone is seeing you as something that is not from this land, then there is there's going to be done there's a lot going to be done to make sure that we're either all removed or all something like that. And also addressing the issue will really require multiple strategies. It's not something that we can just do in one cut and stone designed approach. So to accept and acknowledge that it involves various stakeholders, it involves traditional leaders, it involves religious leaders, and as I've mentioned, the anti-gender movement has known the importance of these leaders and have penetrated them to the extent that you have now religious leaders organizing, public marches to increase vigilantism around our communities. And also, if we think about, if we're going to educate our communities, how do we, provide awareness to challenge these misconceptions about homosexuality as a community? Like Andrew was saying earlier, what is our own contribution? Like, this silence is also contributing a lot to let this misinformation, disinformation continue flowing around. So we need to actively be involved in creating targeted communication just for these institution leaders, for them to be aware that we are in their churches, we are in their cultures, we are, some of us are their cultural leaders, like are serving within their cultural institutions. And also basically promoting culture sensitivity towards LGBTIQ persons. Again, for us to claim the fact that we come from some of these cultures, we are some of us have never left Uganda, so for a narrative to be thrown around of it's a Western import, how do we stand up and portray what our own lived realities are? For some people who have never even reached Entebbe and they found themselves queer, how do we reconcile that with us being our African and being African as we are in our cultures? And also basically we need, it is possible to create a more inclusive society, but we need to be actively involved as queer people. Most times we want people to say things on our behalf. We are talking to to religious leaders, but through other, can we stand up and say these things to themselves ourselves?
Right. Could you please tell us, are there any legal protections in place to safeguard LGBTQ persons from blackmail, and what are the challenges in enforcing these laws effectively?
Again, I'll say this. Unfortunately, there are no laws that specifically protect LGBTI persons from blackmail. However, there are general laws. The broader laws that can be used to protect individuals involved in blackmail, such as the Penal Code Act that, which criminalizes extortion and blackmail in itself, as I mentioned, itself being a criminal act. So if we rely on the existing, if you're extorted, you don't go to police and say, I'm a gay person. You're a Ugandan that has been extorted. So also, how do we report these things to police, or how do we use the general laws to actually protect ourselves? So there's a constitution that provides for human rights for all. So also being aware of some of these things, because again, knowledge is power. When you have the information, it is also easy for you to defend yourself and know how to protect yourself better. The challenge is that in enforcing these laws, we found there's this fear for retaliation. Many people fear to go to police because, again, if it's maybe, let's say, someone you met on Grindr, or someone you had actually have had intimate relationship with, it becomes so, you become the person, the victim fears this information to be spilled at police. And we've seen it happen where someone goes with a case of blackmail and it reaches and it spins around you. Now it becomes a case of homosexuality. So many victims are aware of some of these repercussions, and that creates, that creates that fear. And then there's also lack of trust, where people lack trust in the authorities that be. Many police persons, you'll go to police as a queer person, and instead you'll be made fun of, you'll be bullied, all these things will be said to you, you'll be as if you deserved it, yeah. And also limited resources, guys, following up on police cases or such, taking legal action also you need a lot of money to do it. So, and knowing that our community members, most of them have no, proper financial standing, lack of jobs, all those things. So with the thought of, you'll go to police, the policeman will tell you, I need 10,000 to go and arrest the perpetrator, or I'll need, 500,000 to track the phone. So lack of such resources makes it also difficult to follow up on such cases. And also the general social stigma around being LGBTI, and how do I go to police and report that I, a trans man, has been, blackmailed or extorted. So it becomes an issue where people rely on that social stigma to intimidate us into silence. Someone does something, you have a partner who comes to you, does all these things, and then decides to say, if you don't give me 5 million, I'm going to go to tell the police that you did this. So those are some of the challenges that make reinforcement of things like laws like the Penal Code Act provision on extortion and usable for LGBT community members.
All right. Thank you so much. As we wrap this up, I need you to tell us, are you aware of any African community custom or culture that recognized and protected LGBTQ persons?
Certainly, there are very many African cultures and communities that have recognized and protected LGBT persons. Although these have been often marginalized and hidden from society due to criminalization of homosexuality as is today, and also speaking about the role of colonialization. Colonialists took away some of this, really washed away some of our cultural practices, and that has created a community where you find the social protections that used to exist now being washed away by the current laws and provisions that we have. And some of the cultures we have the Swahili culture, which is mostly coastal, that is Mombasa, Zanzibar, where we have known them to be they have been known to be acceptance of same-sex relationships, with some communities recognizing same-sex marriages. However, this acceptance has been declined over time due to the influence of conservative religious and cultural values. Again, the role of religious and culture in our societies. And then we have the Buganda Kingdom. This has been an open secret for a very long time. There's been conversations about one of the oldest kings of the Buganda culture being, openly queer. And we also have the Ndebele people. These are from Zimbabwe, with a tradition that recognizes and accepts people who do not conform to traditional gender roles, known as skesana. And also, these individuals are often seen as having special spiritual abilities and accepted within their communities. The Hausa tradition of the Yandaudu, this is Nigeria. We've also seen that the part of this culture for centuries have been recognized and accepted by some members of the community, where we have same-sex relations in that culture specifically accepted. It's important to note that the role of this culture has also been faced with discrimination and violence in some parts of Nigeria where homosexuality has been criminalized. And another example also could be the practice of marrying women in Kenya. We have a culture in Kenya called the Nandi people. They are known to marry, they are known for women to marry fellow women. And this has been documented in an anthropology. So there's, unfortunately, while these have been in existence, there's also little literature, to preserve this knowledge about their existence and also their practices. Yeah, that's what I can say.
All right, thank you so much, Sean, and that has been part 2 of episode 5 of the DAS podcast. Watch out for part 3.
You don't want to miss the interesting conversations on Demystifying the African Sexuality podcast. The DAS podcast.